It's a fascinating question. How does a society go from decades of, brutal insurgency to becoming one of the most peaceful and educated places in an entire nation? Well, today we're going to dive into the incredible story of Mizoram, a state in northeast India. Its journey from war to peace is, well, it's nothing short of remarkable. Just look at this contrast. It's night and day, right? On one side, you have this world of fortified hilltop villages ruled by warrior chiefs, and now it's one of modern India's most peaceful and literate states. So the big question is, how? How does a transformation like that happen? That's exactly what we're going to unpack. Okay, so to really get a handle on where Mizoram is today, we've got to go back, way back. We need to understand who the Mizo people were before the outside world really came knocking. You see, their society was forged in these mountains, and it had a totally unique social structure and some really deep-rooted traditions. So the Mizo people, they're part of the Tibeto-Burman group, and they actually migrated into the area we now call Mizoram, coming over from Myanmar. This was happening somewhere between the 16th and 18th centuries. Now, imagine this. Every single hilltop village was basically its own little kingdom, led by a chief they called a lal. And their faith? It was animist. They believed in a spiritual world filled with what they called Hwai, or spirits. And right at the center of this world was something called the Zalbuk. Now, this wasn't just some bachelor's dorm, no way. It was the absolute heart of Mizo society. Think of it like a combo of a school, a military barracks, and a community center, all rolled into one. This is where young men learned everything. Discipline, how to fight, their social duties. It's what created this incredibly disciplined and surprisingly egalitarian warrior culture. So you have this very unique, self-contained world. But it was about to face a massive disruption, because the British Empire was arriving right on its doorstep, and that arrival was going to set off a chain reaction that would change Mizo society forever. And yeah, the relationship started with conflict. No surprise there. In the 1840s, you had Mizo warriors raiding British tea plantations. Well, that escalated. And it kept escalating until the British launched this huge military campaign, the Lushai Expedition, specifically to bring the chiefs under control. And by 1895, it was a done deal. The Lushai Hills were formally annexed into British India. But, military conquest, that was really only half the story. The next wave of change that swept through these hills wasn't brought by soldiers with guns. It was brought by missionaries with books. And honestly, it turned out to be even more revolutionary. So, in 1894, these missionaries arrive, and they do something that is an absolute game changer. They take the Mizo language, which was only spoken, and they create a written alphabet for it, using the Roman script. Just think about that. Suddenly, this unlocked the door to education, and literacy rates just soared. And right alongside that education came a new faith. Within just a couple of generations, pretty much the entire Mizo society had converted from their traditional animist beliefs to Christianity. And the legacy of that single change is just staggering. Today, Mizoram has a literacy rate that's practically 100%. It's one of the highest in all of India. And you can draw a straight line from that achievement all the way back to that missionary push for education over a century ago. All right, let's fast forward to the next major turning point in this story. And this one is, well, it's bizarre. It's a terrifying ecological event that pushed the Mizo people to the absolute breaking point, and, in doing so, planted the seeds for a modern rebellion. It's called the Mautam. And listen, this is not your typical famine caused by a drought or war. This is a cyclical catastrophe, and it's tied to the flowering of a very specific type of bamboo. And the craziest part? It happens like clockwork, every 48 to 50 years. So here's how this nightmare unfolds. First, this one species of bamboo, it flowers all at once, all across the hills. This flowering produces a ton of fruit, which causes the local rat population to just explode. We're talking a plague of rats. And once they've devoured all the bamboo fruit, these massive swarms of rats turn to the human villages, and they eat everything. All the stored grain, all the crops in the fields. The result is just absolute devastating famine. So, during the Great Mautam Famine of 1959, the Mizo people felt completely, utterly abandoned by the Assam government, which was in charge of the area at the time. And that feeling of neglect, that lit a fire. It directly fueled the rise of a man named Lal Denga. He started an organization called the Mizo National Front, or MNF. At first, it was just to provide famine relief, but very quickly, its mission changed to fighting for independence. And what came next was a brutal 20-year-long insurgency. Those beautiful green mountains that had always been a home and a refuge, they became a battleground for one of the longest and toughest conflicts in post-independence India. So, in February 1966, the MNF makes its move. They launch something called Operation Jericho and declare independence. The Indian government's response was incredibly swift and severe. This included, and this is shocking, the bombing of Aizawl, the capital. Later in the 60s, the army forced entire villages of civilians to relocate into these protected grouping centers to try and cut off the rebels' support. It was a deeply traumatic period that lasted all the way until 1986, when a peace accord was finally signed. You know, that bombing of Aizawl, it was a deeply scarring event, something that's really seared into the Mizo consciousness. And just to put it in perspective, it remains the only time in history that India's own air force has been used to bomb its own territory. That just tells you how incredibly intense this conflict really was. But then, after 2 long decades of fighting and violence, something truly remarkable happened. Both sides were just exhausted by the conflict. And they chose to talk. They chose the path of negotiation, and what came out of it was one of the most successful peace processes in the entire region's history. So let's actually break down the terms of that 1986 peace accord, because they're pretty amazing. On one side, the MNF agreed to end all armed operations, surrender their weapons, and operate within the Indian constitution. But look at what the government of India offered in return. It wasn't just about stopping the fighting. They granted Mizoram full statehood, gave it special constitutional protections to preserve Mizo culture, and then, in what was just a masterstroke of reconciliation, they agreed to make the rebel leader, Lal Denga, the state's very first chief minister. And just like that, the war was over. On February 20th, 1987, Mizoram officially became the 23rd state of the Indian Union. A brand new page was turned on a very long and very painful chapter. So what's the legacy of that peace accord? Well, it's the Mizoram you see today. It's not just one of India's most peaceful states. It's a vibrant, thriving place. It's kept those incredibly high literacy rates. Its unique culture is flourishing, with amazing festivals like the Chapchar Cut. And now, it's actually become a really key hub for India's Act East policy, looking towards Southeast Asia. So when you look at this whole story, you have to ask, in a world that feels like it's full of endless conflicts, what can we learn from the Mizo journey? I think it's a powerful reminder, really. It shows that even the deepest, most entrenched conflicts can be solved. It takes dialogue, it takes compromise, and a real genuine desire for peace from both sides. This transformation from warrior hilltop kingdoms to a peaceful modern democracy, well, it offers a really rare and valuable lesson for all of us.